Hello, and welcome to this overview of the Central Indiana Housing Study. My name is Andrea Miller. I'm a senior planner for the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization, commonly abbreviated as the IMPO, and I will be your presenter today. In today's presentation, we'll be going over a few different items. First, I'll be providing you with a quick overview of who the IMPO is. Second, an overview of what the Central Indiana Housing Study is and what's included in it. Third, findings from the housing study. And fourth, a toolkit and next steps. First, that brief introduction to the IMPO and who we are as an organization. Who we are. We're a regional planning organization for Central Indiana. We cover portions of any county area, all of Marion County, and parts of the surrounding counties. We go as far north as Cicero, south to Franklin, west to Danville, and east to Greenfield. And we have over 35 members, which are comprised of the towns, cities, counties, and transportation agencies in our region. Originally, we were founded, as all MPOs were, to organize transportation planning and distribute certain federal transportation funds. However, in 2018, during a strategic planning process, our members identified a need for a regional coordinating planning entity that went beyond transportation. And since that time, we've since expanded to other subject matter, such as economic development, resiliency, and now housing. So what does that mean when we say that we're a regional planning organization? What exactly do we do? We like to describe our work as comprising of 4 key pillars that we provide services to our members under. The first is plan. We create and adopt plans and track their implementation. The second is fund. We fund regionally significant transportation projects. The third is convene. We bring experts and community members together from across the region. And fourth, we inform. We provide reliable data to support planning and policy making. And these last two, convening and informing, were the elements that were focused on for the CIHS. We know that across our planning area, various jurisdictions have completed their own housing studies. So the primary goal of the Central Indiana Housing Study was to provide a holistic understanding of where we are in housing collectively as a region. Because of course the housing in the community down the road also affects you. More specifically, we have 7 different components to the housing study, which can be loosely grouped into 3 phases. Phase 1 is referred to as laying the groundwork, and it provides the foundational information that's important in providing regional context. This includes the Housing Plan and Policy Review, which reviews previous housing studies from across the region and also examines state-level housing legislation from the past 10 years. The second is the socioeconomic profile of the region, which examines demographic patterns, employment and incomes, population mobility, and more. And the third item under this phase is the housing conditions assessment, which includes development patterns and current housing costs. Phase 2 is identifying the problem. Now that we understand where we are as a region, what's underpinning the issues that people have been feeling? This provides an assessment of the current issues that we're facing and what factors motivate it. Specifically, we have a housing gap analysis and demand summary, which looks at the different types of housing in the region and the difference between that and what people can afford. We also look at a contributing factors assessment, which identifies a variety of particularly impactful factors that have been affecting housing. And then there is an investor-owned single-family housing analysis. This looks at the impact and amount of corporate investor-owned housing on housing prices and code violations in our region. And then the third phase, which is next steps, looks at solutions to the problem and providing a series of potential housing policies that can help address the issues identified. That concludes the overview of the Central Indiana Housing Study and the IMPO. However, before we jump into the findings from the housing study, a quick definition to note before we get started. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the term affordable housing. And this study identifies affordable housing as costing no more than 25% of the household's income, which of course means that what is considered affordable varies from household to household. The industry standard is more commonly known as 30% of a household's income. However, the data that we used did not include items such as utilities and insurance. Assuming an additional 5% should be added to cover those costs brings the effective cost ceiling approximately to the 30% standard. So, what did we find in our housing study? The rising cost of housing, where we are, housing prices, and a growing population. Housing costs are rising faster than purchasing power. Between 2020 and 2022, the median sales price of single-family homes increased an average of 31.6% across all IMPO counties. Rent prices increased by an average of 21.2% over that same time period. Meanwhile, wages rose by 8.8% on average. And during the same time period, housing prices continued to rise even as sales volume dropped. What does that mean in terms of dollars? The median sales price of $228,000 in 2020 has increased by $72,000 in less than 3 years to a median sales price of $300,000. Interest rates have also contributed to rising costs of buying a home, with an average rate of 7.5% as of September 2023. Today, in June 2024, the average 30-year interest rate is 7.41%. So while interest rates have declined somewhat, it has been very minimal. And what does this current environment look like for a person who's trying to buy that home? Using the median housing price of $300,000 with an interest rate of 7.5%, we've come up with the following 3 scenarios for someone purchasing a home. Scenario 1 is to provide the recommended 20% down payment. That's $60,000. With this down payment, the monthly housing payment will be just over $1,800, and the household income to afford this home is just under $90,000 a year. Smaller percentage down payments are becoming more popular, however. A 10% down payment would be $30,000. This brings the monthly house payment up to a little over $2,200 a month, and the household income needed to afford this home is a little over $108,000. Or scenario 3, a 5% down payment. That's $15,000. The monthly house payment rises to a little over $2,300 a month, and the household income needed to afford this home is over $113,000. The median household income in central Indiana today is a little over $73,000. The median household cannot afford the median house, even in a situation where they're able to save the recommended 20% for a down payment. This is an item, again, that's a regional housing study. This is for everyone across the Indianapolis metro region. So it is perhaps unsurprising that the rates of cost-burdened households is significant. 61.7% of renters are cost-burdened. That is, they pay more than the recommended 30% of their income towards housing, and nearly 30% are severely so. That means they're spending at least 45% of their income on housing. That is almost half of their income. Nearly 1 out of every 3 renters is spending almost half of their income or greater on just housing. And homeowners are also affected. 24% of owners are cost burdened, so nearly 1 out of every 4. And about another 9% are severely so, and of course that places them in greater danger for foreclosure. And even as current households in Indiana struggle, the region's growth is expected to continue. By 2033, an estimated 111,000 households will be added to the region. And the Housing Production Needs Forecast estimates that an additional 42,000 housing units need to be produced over the next 5 years, or roughly 8,400 per year, in order to keep pace. So we have a housing problem. But even for those who are currently in a well-off in their housing situation, this is a problem for everyone because housing is a quality of life issue. Limited housing options lead to longer commutes, more cost burden, and other lifestyle compromises. And it also affects the availability and quality of services and goods in your community. For example, a local cafe or restaurant may struggle to properly staff because wages cannot keep pace with the rising housing costs and they can't attract and retain workers. This can lead to situations where a business decides to close part of their dining room. Maybe they reduce their operating hours, and at times it may force businesses to close. And it's also a workforce development issue. So whereas the customer, the people living in a community, suffer from a lack of amenities that are being serviced, it's also a problem for the businesses that are trying to employ people. Existing businesses and industries where wages are not keeping pace with the cost of living will struggle. And talent and business attraction are contingent on housing availability for employees. Too often, this can lead to situations where a local business in particular struggles. Whereas a larger company may decide not to locate in a given area because there is not enough housing or the cost of housing is too high relative to the advantages it provides. Housing is expensive then, and it's a problem for everyone living in this region, whether they recognize it or not. But now I'd like to take a closer look at the specifics of our housing stock. First, before we get started, I want to give you a broader understanding of what you're looking at. So the current housing market alignment for Central Indiana looks at gaps between the inventory of housing we have available and what people would like to and can afford to buy. So it provides the supply of housing for renters and home buyers by number of bedrooms and at different household income levels. And then it compares it to housing preferences, that is, what people would prefer to move into. By looking at the difference between the supply and the housing preferences, the housing market alignment generates an assessment of whether there is a surplus, that is green, versus a deficit, a red, a shortage of the particular type of housing unit. And what did we find when we looked at this? First, the region does not have enough small ownership units. These are small ownership units up to 2 bedrooms. So this can look like a condo, a townhome, a duplex. These units can represent a more affordable home ownership opportunity for first-time buyers, and it also provides opportunities for people who are looking to downsize and reduce their maintenance burdens. These units are in short supply across all income levels. So even if you're someone who has over a household income of $200,000 or more, these people are still not able to find the units, these small ownership units. Second, there are too few affordable units for those at lower income levels, especially at smaller 1 and 2 bedroom sizes. Especially for those for lower income households below $35,000, they are struggling to make ends meet. Third, the region has more mid and higher cost 3 and 4 bedroom houses than people would prefer. Again, this is not to say that these units aren't being used, but rather that there is a difference between the preference and the supply. So what we're seeing is that at the same time there's a strong deficit in small ownership units, we're seeing that there's a relative surplus for these mid to higher cost 3 and 4 bedroom houses. And demographic shifts and growth trends are driving the misalignment. Today's housing stock was largely built for households that were more common in previous decades. Households and their housing preferences are changing, such as people are having fewer children later in life or not at all, meaning fewer of those large houses are needed. More singles and couples prefer walkable lifestyles, shifting demand from single-family suburban subdivisions. And baby boomers and empty nesters are downsizing, trading larger houses for smaller houses, townhomes, and condos, and bringing them into direct competition with those first-time home buyers. So what's causing these issues? We're seeing that there's a big difference between what the market would prefer and what's available. Well, the contributing factors behind these issues are a mix of policy decisions as well as broader market forces, both current and historic. And it is important to keep in mind that there is no single item that is alone responsible for the rise in housing unaffordability. However, we do know of a few items that are contributing to this. Some of the market forces that we've identified include items like changing construction costs and rising mortgage rates, where the recent 4-point increase in mortgage rates translated to a reduction in home purchasing power of $155,000. And we also saw in our housing study that corporate single-family home investors in certain neighborhoods own as much as 30% of the housing stock, driving up rents, dampening home prices, and also reducing home ownership rates. But of course, while market dynamics play a significant role in rising unaffordability, we know that they're not the only item that has contributed to today's demands. We have a historical housing stock that is not aligned with what the market wants. And we know that this didn't and doesn't happen in a vacuum. If the preferences are there, the lack of housing is not an accident. It's the result of various policy decisions we have made. What does this look like? Public policy and public opinion plays a strong role. So this can look at like zoning and design standards that limit housing options and drive up development costs. This includes items such as large lot sizes, large minimum setbacks, and preventing certain housing products from being built at all. However, these restrictive standards and plans that are generated by city staff is informed by public opinion. City staff may update these plans and ordinances based on what they hear from community members in public meetings, or influence may come in other ways as councilors or mayors press for changes based on conversations with constituents. Even when a housing development is technically permitted, pushback from the public can effectively end a project before it begins in a process known as remonstration. And community concerns on these projects, while sometimes valid, are often based on inaccurate fears. So, more housing and housing diversity is needed. How do we achieve that? Just as there is no single contributor to the rising cost of housing, neither is there a single policy that will serve as a solution. However, the housing toolkit included in the Central Indiana Housing Study provides specific strategies that various localities can use in addressing housing needs in their community. The toolkit is primarily addressed towards two key audiences. The first is local public agencies, that is, the cities and towns comprised within our region. So the items and policies listed for our local public agencies are intended to provide a full continuum of housing types and attainability across the region. This can look like items such as a housing element in a comprehensive plan, updating the zoning ordinance, using a home repair program, or using a strategic use of property tax abatement for developers. And the other items address the IMPO, which will continue to provide support and information to members. This can look like distributing information from the housing study, continuing to convene experts and stakeholders to discuss, commission follow-up studies, and enhancing awareness of housing challenges. This presentation has provided a quick overview of the entire housing study. However, there's far more information to be found in the full item. If you would like to visit and read more about the housing study, you can find it online at the webpage listed on this presentation. You'll find information such as jobs and migration information, factors that make communities and populations vulnerable, and additional information on the corporate-owned single-family housing and contributing factors. This concludes the Central Indiana Housing Study overview. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please feel free to review the entire study at the listed webpage or by scanning the QR code. For any questions you have, feel free to reach out to me at the listed email or phone number. Thank you and have a good day.